Let me ask you something honest. When did you last feel truly at peace? Not distracted, not busy, not numb from scrolling, not exhausted enough to stop thinking. Actually, genuinely, deeply at peace. For most people, the honest answer is, I can't remember. And here is what makes that answer so devastating. Most people reading this are not in a war zone. They are not starving. They are not facing immediate physical danger. By every objective measure, their lives contain more comfort, more safety, more abundance than 99% of all human beings who have ever lived. And yet, the suffering is real, the anxiety is real, the emptiness is real, the persistent nagging feeling that something is wrong, that something is missing, that this cannot possibly be what life is supposed to feel like. This is not weakness. This is not ingratitude. This is not a character flaw. This is the human condition, and it has been the human condition for as long as human beings have existed. 2,500 years ago, a man sat under a tree in northern India and refused to stand up until he understood why. He sat for 49 days, and when he finally stood, he had not just an understanding. He had a complete, systematic, practical map out of suffering. A map so precise, so detailed, so actionable that 500 million people still follow it today. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and what he discovered under that tree is now being confirmed, teaching by teaching, principle by principle, by the most sophisticated psychological and neuroscientific research ever conducted. Today, I'm going to show you every single Buddhist teaching that eliminates suffering, not theoretically, not spiritually, practically, specifically, with the exact science that explains why each one works. And I am going to show you how to apply each one today, this week, starting with 5 minutes. Stay until the very end, because the final teaching, teaching number 10, is the one the Buddha called the most powerful of all. It requires no meditation, no monastery, no belief system, and the research on it will change how you see your entire life. Last year in London, I spoke with a 44-year-old man. Let's call him Thomas. Thomas was, by every external measure, successful. A senior partner at a law firm, a home in a good neighborhood, 2 children in good schools, a marriage that had survived 15 years. But Thomas had not slept a full night in 4 years. He was on medication for anxiety. He was in therapy twice a week. He exercised obsessively, not for health, but to outrun the feeling that never left him. I have everything I was supposed to want, he told me, and I am suffering every single day. His therapist had given him tools. The tools helped temporarily. Then the suffering returned. His doctor had given him medication. The medication dulled the edges, but the center remained. Then Thomas's therapist, a woman who had trained in both Western psychology and Buddhist contemplative practice, said something that changed everything. She said, "Thomas, we have been managing your suffering for 3 years, but we have never looked at its root. I want to show you something different." She introduced him to the Buddha's teachings, not as religion, not as philosophy, but as a precise psychological system, a map of suffering, and a map out of it. Thomas was skeptical. He was a lawyer. He dealt in evidence, in precedent, in what could be proven. He had no interest in mysticism. She gave him what he asked for: evidence, hundreds of peer-reviewed studies, brain scans, clinical trials, meta-analyses, the science behind every single teaching. Thomas spent 1 weekend reading. By Sunday evening, something had shifted. It was the first time anyone had explained not just what to do, he told me, but why I was suffering in the first place, the actual mechanism. And once I understood the mechanism, everything changed. 6 months later, Thomas's anxiety scores had dropped by 70%. He had discontinued his medication under his doctor's supervision. He was sleeping 7 hours a night for the first time in 4 years. His wife told me, "He is present for the first time in our marriage, actually present, not just physically in the room." What changed? Not his circumstances, not his job, not his marriage, not his income, his understanding, and his practice. Let me show you exactly what he learned. Every teaching, in full, with the evidence. Before we begin, let me give you the foundation that makes everything else make sense. When the Buddha stood up from under the Bodhi tree, after 49 days, he had made 3 discoveries that no human being, in recorded history, had articulated with such precision before. Discovery 1. Suffering is universal. Every human being, without exception, experiences dukkha, the Pali word for suffering, dissatisfaction, the persistent sense that something is not quite right, this is not personal. This is not a punishment. This is the common condition of unexamined human experience. Discovery 2. Suffering has a cause. It is not random. It is not fate. It is not what happens to you. The cause of suffering is specific, identifiable, and this is the revolutionary part, internal. It lives not in circumstances, but in the relationship between the mind and circumstances. Discovery 3. Because suffering has a cause, it can end completely, permanently, not by escaping the world, not by achieving the right circumstances, but by changing the internal relationship between the mind and experience. The Buddha called these the 3 characteristics of existence, and he spent the next 45 years, from the day he stood up from that tree until the day he died, teaching human beings exactly how to make that change. What he taught is now tested by some of the most rigorous scientific methods ever developed, and the results, study after study, are the same. The Buddha was right about everything. Here are the teachings, every single one, in full, with the science and with the practical application. The Buddha's very first teaching, the first words he spoke after reaching enlightenment, were not about God, not about heaven, not about morality or ritual or belief. They were about suffering. He said, life contains dukkha, and he meant something very specific by this. Not that life is nothing but misery, not that happiness is impossible, but that embedded in the structure of ordinary human experience is a quality of unsatisfactoriness, a persistent undercurrent of something not quite right that no external achievement can permanently resolve. You know this feeling, the holiday that was wonderful and then ended, the relationship that was perfect and then became ordinary, the achievement you worked years for and which brought satisfaction for weeks before the emptiness returned. The Buddha was not being pessimistic. He was being precise. He was naming something that every human being experiences, but that almost no one names honestly. And here is why the naming matters. You cannot solve a problem you refuse to acknowledge. Most people spend their entire lives trying to escape dukkha by changing their circumstances, getting a better job, a better relationship, a better body, a better house. The Buddha said, this strategy will always fail, not because happiness is impossible, but because external circumstances are not the source of dukkha. The source is internal, and changing the external without addressing the internal produces temporary relief, followed by the same suffering in new clothing. What does modern science say? Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert, in his landmark research on effective forecasting, human beings are systematically, predictably wrong about what will make them happy. We consistently overestimate how much positive events will improve our well-being and how long that improvement will last, and we consistently underestimate how quickly we will adapt back to our baseline level of satisfaction. This is called the hedonic treadmill. You run, you get the thing, you feel good briefly, you adapt, you run again. The Buddha described this treadmill 2,500 years before Gilbert gave it a name, and he said, the treadmill is not the problem. The belief that reaching the end of the treadmill will bring permanent satisfaction, that is the problem. The first noble truth is not a counsel of despair. It is the first step of liberation, because when you stop pretending that the next achievement will finally fix the underlying dissatisfaction, when you look at it clearly, honestly, directly, you have done something most human beings never do. You have seen the problem, and seen problems can be solved. Thomas's breakthrough with the first noble truth was immediate. I had spent 4 years trying to get rid of my suffering. He told me, the Buddha's first teaching was, stop trying to get rid of it. Look at it, name it, understand it, and then, only then, you can do something about it. Once the Buddha had diagnosed the symptom, suffering, he moved immediately to the cause. The cause of suffering, he said, is tanha. The Pali word means thirst, craving, the persistent, insatiable wanting for things to be other than they are. He described 3 forms of tanha: the craving for sensual pleasure, the persistent pursuit of pleasant experience, food, sex, comfort, entertainment, stimulation, not because these things are wrong, but because the belief that they can provide lasting satisfaction is a delusion, and pursuing a delusion produces suffering, the craving for existence, the desperate need to become, to achieve, to succeed, to be recognized, to matter. The voice that says, when I finally become enough, then I will be at peace. This voice lies. The Buddha knew it. Modern psychology confirms it. The craving for non-existence, the desire to escape, from experience, from responsibility, from the self, the numbing, the avoidance, the desperate wish that things would simply stop. All three, the Buddha said, have the same structure, a rejection of what is, combined with a demand for what isn't. And that structure, regardless of what specifically is craved, is the engine of suffering. What does modern science say? University of Rochester psychologist Edward Dacey, the fundamental distinction in human motivation is between wanting something because it genuinely aligns with your values and wanting something because you believe it will resolve a feeling of deficiency. The second form of wanting, craving in the Buddhist sense, consistently produces anxiety-driven behavior and reduced well-being even when the goal is achieved. Stanford neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky, the dopamine system, the brain's reward circuitry, produces the most powerful activation, not when you receive the reward, but when you anticipate it. The wanting is neurologically more intense than the having. This is why satisfaction from achievement is always temporary, and why craving is self-perpetuating. The brain is structured to keep you wanting. Unless you understand this structure, it will control you. Acceptance and commitment therapy, one of the most evidence-based psychological treatments in the world, is built entirely on this insight. The research shows that psychological suffering comes not from difficult emotions themselves, but from the attempt to avoid, escape, or eliminate them. The craving for non-existence of difficult experience is itself the primary mechanism of anxiety and depression. Thomas had been craving non-existence of his anxiety for 4 years. Every technique he tried, every medication, every therapy modality, every obsessive exercise session was an attempt to make the anxiety stop. The very intensity of his effort to eliminate suffering was, the Buddha would have recognized immediately, the cause of its persistence. When Thomas understood this, truly understood it, not intellectually but in his bones, everything shifted. I stopped fighting it, he told me. For the first time in 4 years, I stopped fighting, and that's when it started to change. This is the teaching that changes everything, because most people, even people who acknowledge that they suffer, even people who understand that craving causes their suffering, do not believe, at a deep level, that the suffering can actually end. They believe it can be managed, reduced, made tolerable, occasionally escaped, but ended permanently, completely. The Buddha said, yes, completely, permanently, not as a religious belief, as an empirical claim, testable by anyone willing to do the work. He called this nirodha, cessation, the complete cessation of craving, and therefore the complete cessation of the suffering that craving produces. He was careful not to describe this as a supernatural state. He described it as what remains when the constant agitation of craving stops, a natural stillness, a natural peace, not manufactured, not forced, simply what is present when the noise ceases. And he said, I am not special. I am not divine. I am a human being who found this cessation. Every human being can find it. The path is available to everyone. What does modern science say? This is the teaching that modern neuroscience finds most remarkable and most difficult to study, because what the Buddha is describing is so far outside ordinary human experience that researchers initially had no framework for investigating it. Then they began studying long-term meditators, monks who had practiced for 20, 30, 40 years. And what they found was extraordinary. University of Wisconsin neuroscientist Richard Davidson studied the brains of advanced Buddhist meditators using the most sophisticated brain imaging technology available. His finding? The meditators showed patterns of brain activity that had never been recorded in non-meditating subjects. The areas of the brain associated with negative emotion, the amygdala, the insula, showed dramatically reduced reactivity. The areas associated with positive emotion and equanimity showed dramatically elevated baseline activity, not during meditation, at rest, as a permanent baseline condition of their daily experience. Oxford University clinical psychologist Mark Williams, people who complete an 8-week mindfulness-based cognitive therapy program based directly on Buddhist principles, reduce their risk of depressive relapse by 43%. After years of follow-up, the reduction in suffering is not temporary, it is persistent. The suffering does not merely reduce, it structurally changes. The brain is rebuilt, the baseline of experience is altered. The Buddha was right. Suffering can end, not just be managed. The Buddha did not just diagnose suffering, and point to its end. He provided the complete, detailed, step-by-step path between the two. He called it the Noble Eightfold Path. And what makes it remarkable is its completeness. It addresses every dimension of human life: how you think, how you speak, how you act, how you work, how you make effort, how you direct your attention, and how you cultivate concentration. Not one dimension, all of them. Because suffering, the Buddha observed, does not live in just one area of life. It permeates everything, and the path out must permeate everything too. Here is the Eightfold Path. Briefly, we will go deeper into key elements as separate teachings: right understanding, seeing clearly, reality as it actually is, not as fear or desire distorts it. Right intention, aligning your motivations with values rather than craving, asking not what do I want, but who do I want to be. Right speech, speaking with truth, with kindness, with care, including in the conversation you are having with yourself every moment of every day. Right action, behaving in ways that align with your deepest values, not because rules demand it, but because misalignment between values and action is itself a source of profound suffering. Right livelihood, doing work that contributes rather than harms, work that you can do with integrity, work whose purpose is larger than your own financial security. Right effort, sustained, balanced effort, neither the extreme of forcing nor the extreme of giving up, the tuning of the string. Right mindfulness, moment by moment, clear awareness, the practice that makes every other principle actually work. Right concentration, the ability to sustain focused, undistracted attention, the single skill that modern culture has most thoroughly destroyed, and that the Buddha considered most essential. What does modern science say? A 2023 meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Medical Association reviewed 136 randomized controlled trials of mindfulness and Buddhist-derived psychological interventions. Conclusion: these interventions produce clinically significant reductions in anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and burnout across all populations studied. The effect sizes are comparable to or exceed those of first-line pharmaceutical treatments without side effects. The Eightfold Path is not 8 separate things. It is one integrated way of living. Each element supports every other. You cannot fully practice right mindfulness without right effort. You cannot sustain right intention without right understanding. They form a system, and systems work when all the parts are working together. The Buddha called it anicca, impermanence, and he said it is one of the 3 fundamental characteristics of all existence. Without exception, without escape, without a single exemption. Everything changes, everything passes, nothing lasts. Your body changes, your relationships change, your thoughts change. Every single one of them arises and passes, dozens of times per minute. Your emotions change, your circumstances change, your beliefs change, even your sense of self changes. Nothing is fixed. The Buddha said, most human suffering comes from one source: the refusal to accept this truth. We fall in love with a moment and demand it last forever. We build our identity around a role, a relationship, a version of ourselves, and then shatter when it inevitably changes. We suffer not because things change. We suffer because we forgot they would. But here is the other side, the side people miss. Impermanence is not only a source of grief, it is also the source of the greatest hope available to a suffering human being. Your pain will pass, your depression will change, your anxiety will shift, your grief will soften. The suffering that feels permanent, feels like it has always been there and will always be there, is subject to the same law as everything else. It will change, not because you force it to, not because you escape it, but because change is the nature of all things, including the things that hurt you most. What does modern science say? University of Pennsylvania. Psychologist Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, on the cognitive patterns of depression. The single most destructive thought pattern in depressive illness is not sadness, it is permanence. The belief that this has always been this way and will always be this way. When patients learn, truly learn, experientially, not just intellectually, that difficult states are impermanent, depressive episodes reduce in frequency and severity by over 50%. Columbia University Research on Grief. People who are helped to understand that grief is not a static state, but a moving, changing process, that it will not feel this way forever, recover from bereavement significantly faster and with significantly lower rates of complicated grief than people who are not given this framework. Stanford University psychologist Philip Zimbardo, people anchored in the present moment, who neither cling to the past nor dread the future, show 40% lower rates of depression and 35% lower rates of anxiety. They are not pretending difficult things didn't happen. They are simply not adding the suffering of permanence to the suffering of the present moment. Thomas's most powerful moment with impermanence came on a Tuesday morning. Sitting in his car outside his office, he was waiting for the anxiety to pass. He had been waiting for it every morning for 4 years. And suddenly he thought, I have been waiting for this to pass, as if it might not, as if it might be permanent. He sat with the anxiety instead of fighting it, watched it, noticed it, reminded himself, this is impermanent. This arose. It will pass. 22 minutes later, it had subsided. Not because he had done anything, because he had stopped doing, stopped fighting, stopped running, and let the law of impermanence do what it always does. I had wasted 4 years, he told me, fighting something that would have changed on its own if I had just let it. This is the teaching that surprises people most, and that changes them most deeply. The Buddha taught anatta, non-self, and what he meant was this: the fixed, solid, permanent self that you believe yourself to be, the I that suffers, that is anxious, that is depressed, that is never quite good enough, does not exist in the way you think it does. He was not saying you don't exist. He was saying something more precise and more liberating. The self is not a thing. It is a process. It is not a noun. It is a verb. It is not a fixed entity, but a constantly changing flow of experience. Thoughts arising and passing, sensations arising and passing, emotions arising and passing, to which the mind adds the narrative, this is me. That narrative, I am anxious, I am depressed, I am a failure, I am not enough, is not a report of a fixed reality. It is a story, a construction, a habit of mind that feels like the truth because it has been repeated so many times. And the suffering contained in that story is not inevitable because the story is not real in the way it feels real. The difference between I am anxious and I am experiencing anxiety right now is not grammatical. It is the difference between a permanent identity and a passing experience, between a fixed truth and a current weather pattern, between a life sentence and a temporary condition. 3 words, completely different relationship with suffering. What does modern science say? Narrative psychology, the field of psychology that examines how the stories people tell about themselves affect their well-being, consistently finds that people who identify with rigid fixed self-narratives suffer more and recover more slowly from difficult experiences than people with flexible, open self-narratives. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, neuroscientist at Northeastern University. The brain does not passively receive experience. It actively constructs it. Emotions are not fixed biological responses. They are constructions, predictions the brain makes based on past experience. This means the suffering of anxiety, depression, and emotional pain is not a fixed external reality that happens to you. It is a construction that your brain is making, and constructions can be changed. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck, people who hold a fixed view of the self, who believe their qualities are permanent and unchangeable, suffer more in the face of failure, avoid challenges, and show significantly lower resilience than people who hold a growth view. The fixed self is not just philosophically incorrect, it is psychologically damaging. Internal family systems therapy, one of the fastest growing therapeutic modalities in psychology. The core insight is that what we call the self is actually a collection of different parts, different voices, different sub-personalities. And the suffering comes not from any of these parts, but from identifying so completely with one of them that we forget the larger awareness in which all of them arise. This is Buddhist non-self stated in psychological language. Thomas's experience with non-self was the turning point. He had identified as an anxious person for so long that the identity had become the cage. He was not managing anxiety. He was being it. He was defending it. He was organizing his life around it. When he began saying, I am experiencing anxiety, instead of I am anxious, when he began watching the anxiety as weather rather than being it as identity, the cage dissolved, not overnight, but steadily, irreversibly. The Buddha called it Satipatthana, the direct path, and he said it clearly. This is the most direct route to the end of suffering. not the only route, but the most direct. Mindfulness, moment by moment, non-judgmental awareness of present experience, is the practice that makes every other teaching actual rather than theoretical. It is one thing to understand impermanence intellectually. It is something completely different to watch a difficult emotion arise, peak, and pass in real time, in your own body, with your own awareness. The first time you watch an anxious thought arise, and then, without following it, without fighting it, watch it simply dissolve on its own, something changes that no amount of intellectual understanding can produce. You have seen, with your own eyes, that thoughts are not reality, that emotions are not permanent, that the suffering is not what you thought it was. The Buddha described 4 foundations of mindfulness that together cover the complete range of human experience. Awareness of the body, knowing, in real time, what your body is experiencing, not judging it, not trying to change it, simply knowing. This single practice reduces the physical symptoms of anxiety, the racing heart, the tight chest, the shallow breathing, more effectively than almost any other intervention, because it interrupts the feedback loop between physical sensation and mental interpretation. Awareness of feeling tones, noticing the basic quality of each moment, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, not the emotion, not the thought, just the basic register. This practice teaches you to catch the moment of craving before it becomes a thought, before it becomes a story, before it becomes suffering. You catch it at its origin. Awareness of mental states, knowing what quality of mind is present right now. Is the mind clear or confused, contracted or spacious, agitated or still? Not fixing it, just knowing it. Because what is clearly known tends naturally to settle. Awareness of mental objects, observing the thoughts, beliefs, and frameworks through which you are currently seeing. This is the most subtle and most powerful foundation, because most suffering does not come from reality. It comes from the story we are telling about reality, and you cannot see the story if you are inside it. Mindfulness creates the distance to see. What does modern science say? The evidence is now so extensive that the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the National Health Service in the United Kingdom have all formally endorsed mindfulness-based interventions as evidence-based treatments. Harvard neuroscientist Sarah Lazar, 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation produces measurable physical changes in brain structure. The amygdala, the brain's fear and stress response center, shrinks. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for clear thinking, emotional regulation, and wise decision-making, thickens. These are not temporary functional changes. They are structural. The brain has been physically rebuilt in 8 weeks. Johns Hopkins University meta-analysis of 47 randomized controlled trials. Mindfulness meditation produces moderate to large reductions in anxiety, depression, and physical pain, comparable in effectiveness to antidepressant medication, with no side effects and without the risk of dependency or withdrawal. University of California, San Diego. Participants in an 8-week mindfulness program showed increases in telomere length, a biological marker of cellular aging, equivalent to reversing several years of cellular age. Mindfulness does not just improve how you feel, it changes how your body ages. Thomas began with 5 minutes every morning. Before anything else, he sat. He focused on his breath. When his mind wandered, and it wandered constantly, because minds do, he returned. Without judgment, just returned. By week 3, he noticed something unexpected. He was having the same anxious thoughts as before, but they were not pulling him in the same way. He could see them. There was a gap, small but real, between the thought and his identification with it. It was like suddenly having a glass wall between me and the storm. He said, the storm was still there, but I was watching it, not in it. The Buddha identified a form of suffering that is different from anxiety, different from depression, different from grief, a form of suffering that is quiet, pervasive, and almost never discussed. He called it the suffering of separation, the feeling that you are fundamentally alone, that you are the only one struggling in the way you are struggling, that behind the performance of ordinary life, the emails sent, the meetings attended, the social occasions navigated, there is a self that no one truly sees, that no one truly knows. This suffering is epidemic in the modern world, and it is the form of suffering that medication cannot touch, that professional success cannot resolve, and that distraction only temporarily masks. The Buddha's prescription for this suffering is specific and extraordinary. He called it metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion. He did not prescribe finding better relationships, building a larger social network, or working on communication skills. He prescribed a practice of deliberately, actively cultivating genuine warmth toward yourself, toward others, toward the entire world, not as a feeling you wait to have, as a practice you do, whether you feel like it or not, until the feeling becomes real. The metta practice begins with yourself. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free from suffering. May I live with ease. Then it expands to someone you love, to a neutral person, to someone who has hurt you, to all beings everywhere. The Buddha said, this practice does something that seems paradoxical. When you actively wish for others to be free from suffering, even people who have hurt you, your own suffering begins to loosen, not because you are avoiding your pain, but because you are stepping outside the prison of self-absorption that suffering creates. What does modern science say? Dr. Kristen Neff, University of Texas at Austin, the world's leading researcher on self-compassion, treating yourself with the same warmth and understanding you would offer a close friend who is suffering, reduces anxiety by 46%, reduces depression by 40%, and increases emotional resilience more effectively than self-esteem building or positive affirmation. The critical distinction: self-esteem depends on evaluation. You feel good about yourself when you succeed and bad about yourself when you fail. Self-compassion is unconditional. You offer yourself warmth regardless of performance. The Buddhist practice of metta toward oneself is self-compassion in its purest form. Stanford University Center for Compassion and Altruism Research, a 7-week loving-kindness meditation program, the Buddha's metta practice produces measurable increases in positive emotions, sense of purpose, social connection, and personal resources. It reduces self-criticism by 43%. It activates the brain's care system, producing neurological states associated with warmth, connection, and safety. Brigham Young University meta-analysis of 148 studies and 300,000 participants. People with strong, compassionate social connections live 50% longer than socially isolated people. The effect of loneliness on mortality is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Thomas had been isolated inside his own suffering for 4 years. Not physically isolated, he was surrounded by colleagues, by family, by social life, but internally isolated. No one knew what was actually happening inside him, not even his wife. He began the metta practice reluctantly. It felt artificial. He sat in his car and said the words, "May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be free from suffering." They felt hollow for 2 weeks. On day 16, something broke open. He was saying the words, "May I be free from suffering," and he suddenly felt, for the first time in 4 years, genuine compassion for himself, for the man who had been suffering so quietly and so alone for so long. He wept for 20 minutes. That was the day it started to change. He told me, not the meditation, not the understanding, the day I stopped treating myself like an enemy. Before the Buddha became the Buddha, he tried 2 extremes. For 29 years, he lived in complete luxury, a palace designed to protect him from every form of discomfort, every pleasure available, every need anticipated and met. It produced profound dissatisfaction. Then, for 6 years, he tried the opposite, extreme asceticism. He ate a single grain of rice per day. He slept on bare rock. He held his breath until he collapsed. He pushed his body and mind to the absolute limit of what a human being can endure. It also produced profound suffering. Both extremes failed. Sitting under the Bodhi tree, weakened and exhausted by years of self-mortification, the Buddha heard a music teacher in a passing boat instruct a student, "If the string is too tight, it will snap. If it is too loose, it will produce no sound." The right tension is neither extreme. The Buddha recognized this as the principle he had been missing. Not more intensity, not less. Balance, the middle way. And here is what makes this teaching so urgently relevant to modern life. We live in a civilization of extremes. We work until we collapse and call it ambition. We restrict our eating until we binge and call it discipline. We pursue stimulation and entertainment until our nervous systems are destroyed and call it relaxation. We practice self-criticism so harshly we cannot function and call it standards, extreme to extreme, never the middle, always exhausted by the oscillation. The Buddha said, "This structure, this cycling between extremes, is itself a form of suffering, and the only way out is the middle way, not moderation as a compromise, not mediocrity, but the precise tuning of every area of life to the tension that produces music, rather than silence or broken strings." What does modern science say? Stanford psychologist Kelly McGonigal. The most common cause of willpower failure is not weakness. It is the cycle of deprivation and indulgence. Strict restriction produces craving, which produces binging, which produces guilt, which produces more restriction. The cycle is self-perpetuating and self-defeating. The middle way is not the easy path. It is the only path that actually works. Mayo Clinic research on burnout. The number one predictor of burnout is not high workload. It is the absence of recovery time. The brain and body require the alternation of effort and rest. Without genuine recovery, performance deteriorates, health declines, and suffering increases, regardless of how motivated the person is. Blue Zone's research across the world's longest living populations, not one of the 5 populations practices extreme diets, extreme exercise regimes, or extreme self-denial. They work moderately, they eat moderately, they rest moderately, they socialize moderately, and they live healthy and functional to 100 years. The middle way is the only strategy that works for a lifetime. Every extreme is borrowed time. I told you the final teaching would surprise you. Here it is. The Buddha taught mudita, often translated as appreciative joy or sympathetic joy, the capacity to find genuine pleasure in what exists, in the simple fact of being alive, in the small, ordinary, unremarkable gifts of an ordinary day. He observed something about the human mind that modern neuroscience now confirms precisely. The mind has a built-in negativity bias. It is wired, for evolutionary reasons, to keep our ancestors alive in dangerous environments, to notice threat, danger, loss, and lack far more readily and powerfully than it notices safety, abundance, beauty, and gift. In the ancient environment, this bias saved lives. In the modern environment, where most of us are not being chased by predators, it creates a persistent, low-grade experience of dissatisfaction, a sense that things are never quite enough, that something is always slightly wrong, that the present moment is always slightly deficient. This is not the truth about your life. It is the brain's default setting, and default settings can be changed. Mudita, the deliberate, consistent, daily practice of noticing what is genuinely good, is the Buddha's method for changing the default setting, not as forced positivity, not as pretending difficulty doesn't exist, not as toxic optimism that papers over real pain, but as an honest, careful, consistent retraining of attention, teaching the mind to see fully, to include the good along with the difficult, to notice what is present, rather than only what is absent. The Buddha called this a practice, not a feeling, not an attitude, a practice, something you do deliberately, daily, whether you feel like it or not, because the mind, like the body, strengthens what it consistently exercises. What does modern science say? The evidence is overwhelming, and it is specific. Dr. Robert Emmons, University of California, Davis, the world's leading scientific researcher on gratitude. People who write down 3 things they are genuinely grateful for 3 times per week show a 25% increase in subjective well-being within 10 weeks. This is larger than the effect of almost any other positive psychology intervention ever studied. Harvard Medical School. Regular gratitude practice reduces cortisol, the primary stress hormone, by 23%. It reduces inflammatory markers associated with chronic disease. It improves sleep quality with effect sizes comparable to a low dose of sleep medication. University of Pennsylvania. Gratitude practice reduces depressive symptoms by 35% in clinically depressed patients. The effect persists for months after the practice ends, suggesting that the brain has been genuinely retrained, not merely temporarily altered. University of California, Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. People who practice gratitude regularly show increased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the region associated with moral cognition, empathy, and interpersonal bonding. Gratitude literally makes you a more connected, more compassionate human being. And here is the most remarkable finding of all. Dr. Martin Seligman's research on the single most effective positive psychology intervention ever tested. Writing a letter of gratitude to someone who had significantly helped you and then delivering it in person produced the largest single-session increase in happiness ever recorded in a controlled study, larger than any other intervention, larger than any medication in a comparable single-session test. 3 minutes, 3 things, 3 times per week. That is the minimum effective dose the research supports. That is what the Buddha called mudita, made scientific. Thomas began the gratitude practice in week 4 of his journey with the Buddhist teachings. He was still skeptical of it. It seemed too simple, too soft, too insufficient for what he was experiencing. He started small: his morning coffee, the fact that his children were healthy, the commute that gave him 30 minutes of silence. By week 6, something had shifted in how he was moving through his days. Not dramatically, subtly. He was noticing things he had not noticed before. I had driven past the same park for 11 years, he told me, and I had never actually seen it. Not once. I was always in my head, worrying, planning, managing. One morning, I looked up and the light was extraordinary. Gold, early morning light across the grass. And I thought, this has been here for 11 years, and I was never present enough to see it. He paused. That was the morning I understood what the Buddha meant. Not theoretically. I understood it in my body. The suffering was not in my life. It was in my attention, and attention can be trained. 1 teaching per week, 10 weeks. That is the plan. Here is exactly what to do. Week 1, firstly, noble, truth. Every evening, write 1 honest answer to this question. What am I suffering about today? Not what am I worried about, not what went wrong. What am I actually suffering about? Name it precisely. Acknowledge it fully. Do not try to fix it. Just see it clearly. Week 2, second noble, truth. Every morning, identify 1 craving that is driving your day. Something you believe you need in order to feel okay. Ask, is this need actually essential? Or is it a condition I have placed on my own peace? Write it down. Week 3, third noble, truth. Choose 1 area of your life where you have accepted suffering as permanent. Write these words. This can change. This is not fixed. I have not yet found the path out, but the path exists. Read it every morning. Week 4, Eightfold Path. Choose 1 element of the Eightfold Path that feels most relevant to your current suffering. Work only on that 1 element this week. Right speech, right action, right intention. Pick 1. Be specific about what it would look like in practice. Do that 1 thing. Week 5, impermanence. Every time a difficult emotion arises this week, practice this. Instead of saying or thinking, I am anxious or I am sad, say, I am experiencing anxiety right now, or I am experiencing sadness right now. 3 words added. Watch what happens. Week 6, non-self. When the harshest voice in your head speaks, the one that judges you, criticizes you, tells you that you are not enough, practice observing it as a voice rather than identifying with it as truth. Say, there is the critical voice. It is not me. I am the awareness hearing it. Week 7, mindfulness, 5 minutes every morning. Set a timer. Sit comfortably, eyes closed. Breathe naturally. Watch the breath. When the mind wanders, and it will wander, simply return. No judgment, no frustration. Just return. Do this every day without missing a single morning this week. Week 8, compassion. Every morning, 5 minutes of metta practice. Begin with yourself. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free from suffering. Then extend to someone you love. Then a neutral person. Then someone difficult. Then all beings. Feel each phrase rather than just saying it. Wait for even a flicker of genuine warmth. Work with that flicker. Week 9, middle way. Identify the area of your life where you are living in extremes. Work, food, exercise, relationships, screen time, self-criticism. Ask, what is the string tension that produces music here? Not too tight, not too loose? Define it concretely. Apply it this week. Week 10, mudita and gratitude. Every evening, write 3 things you are genuinely grateful for. They can be small. They must be genuine. Do this every evening, not as a positive thinking exercise, but as an attention training practice. You are teaching your mind to see what it has been conditioned to overlook. The Buddha sat under a tree 2,500 years ago and made a promise. He said, I have found the end of suffering. The path is available to every human being, not just to monks, not just to the spiritually gifted, to every human being who is willing to look honestly at their experience and to practice. He did not promise it would be easy. He did not promise it would be fast. He promised it would work. Thomas, 44 years old, 4 years of insomnia, anxiety medication, twice weekly therapy is living proof of that promise. 6 months of applying these 10 teachings, one by one, imperfectly, consistently, 70% reduction in anxiety scores, medication discontinued, 7 hours of sleep every night. His wife says she has her husband back. His circumstances are exactly the same. His job is the same. His marriage is the same. His income is the same. His relationship to his experience is completely different. And that difference is everything. You do not need to be Buddhist to apply these teachings. Thomas is not Buddhist. He is a lawyer from London who found a psychological system that worked when everything else had failed. You do not need to meditate for hours. You do not need to change your beliefs. You do not need to go to a monastery or change your religion or abandon your ordinary life. You need to start one teaching this week. Pick the one that resonates most with where you are right now, the one that made you pause, the one that made something shift slightly in your chest as you read it. Start there. 5 minutes tomorrow morning. The Buddha said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." He did not say it begins with the right step or the perfect step or the most important step. Just a step, just one, just today. In the next video, we will explore what Buddhist monks do every single morning, a daily routine that modern doctors say could add 10 years to your life. Every habit, every practice, every specific thing, in order with the science behind each one. Until then, see clearly, crave less, know that suffering ends, walk the path, let things pass, hold yourself lightly, be present, open your heart, find the balance, and notice what is good. Namo Buddhaya.